תל אביב 360, ערוץ הפודקאסטים של אוניברסיטת תל אביב.
Thank you very much. Don't be so sure about it. My name is Tamir Pardou. First of all, I would like to thank you all by being invited here. It's quite challenging trying to talk here for coming 20 minutes in this gracious audience. I was the director of the Mosad until 2016. I served for 43 years, starting in the army, and then 35 years in the Mossad. I'm not an expert on the Middle East. Well, you know, someone asked me, try to describe what is running a Mossad as being a director and serving there for 35 years. So I said, running a Mossad is actually running thousands of startups on any moment. Those who should start in the morning and be terminated by the evening, with success, of course. And those startups that you can start today, and it can take you 3-4 years until you accomplish your mission. And actually, as a director, you are handling crisis from morning to morning, running those startups, encoding, trying to fulfill your responsibilities to your country. But when I'm trying to analyze our situation, I must admit that during the last 15-20 years, we are dealing with a totally different kind of a world. We are dealing, actually, we are living in the global village. I remember I was 3 weeks in service as a director when we saw it was Friday noontime. Huge amount of people in Tahrir Square in Cairo. It was the first day of the Arab Spring in the Middle East. Few weeks before then, we saw same events in Tunisia. And I remember I got a briefing a few hours later saying that in few countries, non-democratic countries, they blocked the ability of the people to surf on the internet. Egypt, demonstrations, everything was deleted there. No one in those countries could find what's happening in Egypt. And I asked myself, how come? We're talking about China, for instance. Why they did it? Years later, after we saw ISIS playing their game in the field, there was an understanding. And I remember discussions with partners, directors of Mossad institutions all over the world, intelligence communities, that actually we are living in a totally different world. It's not enough to discuss the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. Because today, if there's demonstrations somewhere in a remote place in the world, within minutes, it's everywhere. And we saw implications of riots in Egypt, in demonstrations all over the world those days, for the same reason, because people went out from their home because they suffered from the same problems. They didn't have enough money to support their own families. They were in a miserable situation because corruption and misunderstanding of the leadership wherever they were. As time was passing, we saw that actually it's a totally different world, and decisions that should be taken were not like we did in the past, that Israel, we have Egypt, okay, before 77, we have Syria, we have Lebanon, we have Jordan, and actually it was 90% of the job to give an assessment on a bilateral situation. Think what happened in 2007, for instance. I was then deputy director of the Mossad, and we found out the North Korean reactor in Syria. What was this reactor? It was not a Syrian one. It was a North Korean one. In all Syria, I guess that less than 5 people knew about it. And for several years, it was a turnkey project that was built totally by North Korean. Not even one worker was a Syrian one. What does it mean? Think about the United States of America. Their prime challenge those days was North Korea. They knew nothing about it. Think about South Korea. They knew nothing about it. And for years, ships with equipment and manpower traveled all the way from North Korea to Syria, bringing people, bringing all the components they needed to build the reactor. This was the first time ever that someone tried to build the reactor as a turnkey project without the involvement of the host. It was the first time ever that someone thought about exporting military nuclear capabilities to a different country. Actually, nobody knows if Syrian would have gained something of it on the nuclear base, because they didn't have any capabilities to handle it. Are there any other reactors in other places in the world built the same way? We have no idea. But to understand this change, it took us years. I'm not sure that even now, many countries, Western countries around the world, really do understand the situation. Now, think about ISIS. At the very beginning, ISIS had greatest achievement. By the way, they killed Muslims. The majority, 99.9% of the people that were killed were their own brothers and sisters. And then, at a certain day, when an agreement was signed with Iran, the nuclear agreement, there was a change in the war vis-à-vis ISIS. Qasem Soleimani was the leader of the IRGC, handled the war against ISIS. Actually, it was the first time that the allies controlled by the United States of America have the same mission to defeat ISIS. Actually, they fought together, shoulder to shoulder, by not being in the same war room against the same enemy. And for the first time, Iran was able to open a corridor from Tehran to the Mediterranean, imposing, let's say, deployed bases in Iraq, opening the door in Syria by fighting ISIS, and we see the results today. So we are talking with Iran. Iran, from my point of view, is a great winner of the war that the Middle East suffered from until 5 years ago, vis-a-vis against ISIS. They are there. So we're not talking about Iran that is only developing a nuclear weapon. They are the major power here in the Middle East. And Iran, with millions of students, very good universities, becoming a challenge. Who could have think that big Russia will buy drones from Iran? Many people thought Iran as not a tier A country, not even a tier 5 country. So Russia is buying weapons from Iran. So the Ukraine war is not a regional war somewhere in Europe. It's a world war. Politicians today, leaders today, governments today, do not understand that the world had changed. That things that are happening on one corner have immediate implication on the world, world. I remember that toward the end of my term, that I got the morning briefing as a director. If in the past, what was interesting is, okay, we're talking about terror, so it's all worldwide. But when we have our enemies or challenges, so we have Iran, we have Syria, more or less. But later on, their briefing was what's happening in southern China Sea, what's happening in between Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in Crimea in 2014, what's happening, the fight in Kirkuk, northern part of Iraq, what's happening in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or South Africa. So we had to try to understand and to give an assessment that was a very different one that we had as a challenge before then. Because as living in the global village, you're living in a different world. I'm using the term, we are living in the world of frenemies. Think like frenemies, those who can be friends and enemies at the same time. The moment we can share the same interest, we are friends. But in certain subjects, they are my enemy. So it's not new. But today, when they are looking towards the rest of the world, or this planet, as one place, as one village, it's very hard to take the right decision. If you're going to ask me, the biggest mistake in the second half of the last century was the attack on Iraq. The moment that Iraq was attacked by the United States and their allies in 2003, they changed the world. The world was based on equilibrium system. Iran was challenged by Iraq. Everyone remembers the Iraq-Iran war. The moment that Iraq disappeared, Iran became number one with no threats. And that was a big mistake that was done. And we are, all of us, are suffering for one mistake that was done by a mistaken assessment that Iraq is developing a mass destruction weapons. So a mistake that was done by intelligent people using the wrong intelligence brought the world to a disaster. Because we see the results today, where Iran is. We now try to understand why Saudi Arabia are trying to reach some agreement with Iran. And it's not only because United States, we think that they are out. Not that they have their own problems. They always pay the price. In the 20th century and the 21st century, American soldiers died in battlefields that were far, far away from the United States. Why? Why they did it? Because they have their own interest. But they have moral interests as well. They had the price in lives, and they paid the price in economy. The amount of money that they spent in those wars in Iraq and Afghanistan brought the American economy to, a very difficult point. So when we are thinking today about the situation in the world, we must understand it's a very complicated one, and we need real leaders. But there are none, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pardo, for these, as I said before, highly illuminating remarks. And, we're going to open the floor for some sort of a short Q&A discussion. If you have comments, questions, please come up with that. But maybe before, let me just ask you, considering the situation in Israel, sort of an upheaval, to what extent you would connect that to sort of outside threats or security threats from the out? In other words, to what extent actually those guys that we talked about before, namely the professional troublemakers in the region, what do they perceive or what do they take of Israel at this time in terms of the struggle or the conflict with Israel?
There is a phrase in Hebrew when someone is no idea what he is doing, is that he's using the word Noach, okay, with 7 mistakes. So that's actually what we are doing during the last, let's say, at least 4 or 5 months. We are doing every mistake. We're talking about, I'm not talking about the economy. I'm not talking about the revolution, but we're thinking what has happened during the 5 months in this region. It's, from my point of view, it's a real disaster. Israel has the best military capabilities, not only in the Middle East, much more than Middle East. Israel has one of the best intelligence services worldwide. Israel is a miracle. It's a startup nation. We are, even now, one of the richest countries in the world. It's not Israel that was established, born 75 years ago. And all the countries around us knows it. They want a relationship with Israel, not because they liked us, not because they admire us, because they need us. Because they need prosperity, they need to bring food to the fridge of every citizen. As Mao Zedong said, when he was the first leader in New China, he said, I have to feed 800 million people, 3 meals a day. I have to give proper education. I have to give a minimal healthcare system. To do it, that's the greatest challenge. All those countries around us, starting with Egypt, that has around 100 million people, they need our capabilities. They knew that. We started after the peace treaty in 1977. We started, it was a cold peace because we didn't manage to solve the Palestinian conflict. And when I met many leaders in the Middle East, always I heard the question, what the hell do you want? What is your vision when you are dealing with Israel between the Mediterranean and the Jordan Valley? What do you want? The moment you will say what you want, we'll be able to open a new book, a new chapter, that we will be able to receive from you what we need so badly, and you will be able to get from us what you need, peace. And what happened, that's just 5 months ago. We established a government that at least part of it are thinking totally on the other way. They don't want to solve any problem. They're looking at Jewish supremacy. And in a minute, we saw, try to remember, our Prime Minister was not invited yet to those countries that he was the sponsor of the Abraham Accord. Just this morning, I read on the paper that in Bahrain, that I know them very well, the Crown Prince abolished all the reforms in the education system that try to show Israel as, let's say, as we are human beings and we are on the right side of the moon. They went back to those days before the Abraham Accord. Our Prime Minister was not invited to the Emirates. He talked about opening a new relationship with Saudi Arabia. It never happened. On the contrary, even with Russia, that we have some kind of decent relationship, no more. So we see now a new axis. We see Iran, Russia, Syria, Jordan, Hezbollah, the Hamas. It's quite an unpleasant one. We see what the Chinese are doing in the Emirates. It is connected to what's happening here in Tel Aviv. As I said previously, we are living in a global village. Things that are happening here got immediate implication all over the world. Even we're so small but we are quite significant power in the region.
Thank you.
תל אביב 360, ערוץ הפודקאסטים של אוניברסיטת תל אביב.